I never thought 35 years of marriage would end with divorce papers served at my retirement party, but when 43 phone calls revealed the truth about my wife's secret life, she learned that underestimating me was her biggest mistake. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne bubbles caught the light from the crystal chandelier as I stood in the center of our Atlanta living room, surrounded by colleagues from Hartwell Engineering. After 35 years of building bridges and designing skylines, this was supposed to be my moment, my retirement party, the golden years ahead of me. Instead, I watched my husband Marcus hand me an envelope with the coldest smile I'd ever seen on his face. "What's this?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the jazz music streaming from the sound system. The room was packed with people from my firm, neighbors, and friends we'd collected over decades of marriage. Everyone was laughing, sharing stories about my career, toasting to my future. But Marcus's expression cut through the celebration like ice. "Open it, Diana," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over the years, the tone that meant he thought he was about to win something. My fingers trembled as I tore open the envelope. The letterhead from Richardson Associates, one of Atlanta's most ruthless divorce firms, stared back at me. The words blurred together as I scanned the document, but the meaning was crystal clear. Divorce papers, irreconcilable differences, division of assets, my retirement savings, my pension, our house, everything I'd worked for split down the middle. The room seemed to tilt. Conversations continued around me, but they sounded distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. My colleague Sarah was telling someone about the bridge project in Savannah that had kept me working 16-hour days for months. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was laughing about how I'd helped her son with his engineering homework. They had no idea that my world was crumbling in real time. "Marcus," I whispered, stepping closer to him. "What is this? Why now? Why here?" His smile widened, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never noticed before. Satisfaction, like he'd been planning this moment for months. Perfect timing, don't you think? Now that you're retired, you'll have plenty of time to find a new place to live. I've already retained Richardson. Papers are filed. The cocktail glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the hardwood floor we'd refinished together 5 years ago. The sound cut through the party chatter, and several heads turned our way. I forced a smile and bent to pick up the pieces, my mind racing. "I'll get that," Marcus said loudly, crouching beside me, but his voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't make a scene, Diana. These people don't need to know your business. Just smile and pretend everything's fine until they leave." I looked up at him, this man I'd shared a bed with for over 3 decades, who'd held my hand through my father's funeral, who'd celebrated every promotion and project milestone with me. This stranger wearing Marcus's face. "We need to talk," I managed to say. "Nothing to discuss. It's all in the papers. You get half, I get half. Clean break." He stood, brushing invisible dust off his khakis. "I've got plans, Diana, plans that don't include growing old with someone who's forgotten how to live." Someone called my name from across the room, wanting to take a photo. I straightened, my training as an engineer kicking in. Engineers solve problems. We analyze data. We build solutions. And right now, I needed to compartmentalize this disaster and get through the next few hours without falling apart in front of everyone who'd come to honor my career. The party dragged on for another 2 hours. I smiled until my cheeks ached, accepted congratulations on my retirement, and listened to speech after speech about my contributions to the firm. All the while, Marcus played the supportive husband, refilling glasses and telling stories about our early years together. The performance was flawless. When the last guest finally left, I locked the front door and turned to face him. He was already clearing glasses, humming under his breath like nothing had happened. "So," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest, "how long have you been planning this?" He didn't look up from the stack of plates he was carrying to the kitchen. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Marcus set the plates down with more force than necessary. Fine, 6 months, maybe 8. You've been so buried in work, so focused on your precious projects, that you never noticed anything anyway. The accusation hit like a slap. I was supporting us. I was building our future. Everything I did was for both of us. Everything you did was for your ego, he shot back. Diana Monroe, star engineer. Diana Monroe, the bridge builder. When's the last time you cooked dinner? When's the last time we went anywhere that wasn't a work function? When's the last time you asked me how I was feeling about anything? I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. The truth was, I couldn't remember. The past 5 years had been a blur of deadlines and site visits, late nights at the office, and weekends spent reviewing blueprints. I'd assumed Marcus understood. I'd assumed he was proud of my success. So you decided to blow up our marriage instead of talking to me? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Talk to you? Diana, I've been trying to talk to you for years. You're never here, and when you are, you're thinking about work. I sank onto the couch, the weight of the day finally settling on my shoulders. Is there someone else? The silence stretched between us, and I had my answer. Her name's Vanessa, he said quietly. She's 28. She laughs at my jokes. She thinks I'm interesting. 28. I was 57. The math was brutal and clear. How long? 2 years. 2 years. While I'd been designing the infrastructure that would outlast both of us, he'd been building a relationship with someone young enough to be our daughter. The betrayal cut deeper than the divorce papers. I went to bed alone that night, staring at the ceiling in our master bedroom that would soon belong only to him. The divorce papers lay on my nightstand, the reminder that 35 years could be reduced to legal documents and property division. But as the hours ticked by, something began to shift inside me. I'd spent my entire career solving complex problems. I'd designed bridges that could withstand earthquakes, buildings that could weather hurricanes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I'd never backed down from a challenge, never accepted defeat when the math seemed impossible. This was just another problem to solve. The next morning, Marcus was gone before I woke up. A note on the kitchen counter informed me he was staying at his brother's place until I could figure out living arrangements. The house felt enormous and empty, every room echoing with memories that now felt poisoned. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, determined to understand exactly what I was facing. The divorce papers outlined a 50-50 split of everything: the house, my pension, my 401k, our savings accounts. After 35 years of building a life together, I'd walk away with exactly half of what I'd earned. But something nagged at me as I read through the documents. Marcus had never shown much interest in our finances. I'd always handled the investments, the insurance, the retirement planning. How did he suddenly know the exact value of everything we owned? How did he have such detailed information about my pension and benefits? I pulled out the files I kept in my home office, cross-referencing the numbers in the divorce papers with our actual financial records. Everything matched perfectly. Too perfectly. Someone had done their homework, and it wasn't Marcus. The landline rang, cutting through my concentration. I almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. Hello, is this Diana Monroe? The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. Yes? My name is David Chen. I'm an investigator with Guardian Insurance. We're conducting a routine audit of some claims, and your husband's name came up. Could I ask you a few questions? Insurance investigator. My stomach dropped. What kind of claims? Well, that's what we're trying to determine. We have some discrepancies in the paperwork, and we thought you might be able to help us understand what's going on. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of discrepancies? Mr. Monroe filed a disability claim 18 months ago, claiming a back injury that prevents him from working. but we have some information suggesting he's been quite active despite this alleged injury." The world tilted again. Marcus had been collecting disability payments for 18 months? I thought about all the times he'd complained about his back, how he'd stopped helping with yard work, how he'd started sleeping in the guest room because the mattress was too soft for his condition. "I think there's been some mistake," I said carefully. "My husband isn't disabled. He's been fine." "That's interesting. Would you be willing to meet with me to discuss this further? We're building a case, and your cooperation would be very helpful." I agreed to meet him the next day, my mind spinning with implications. If Marcus had been fraudulently collecting disability payments, that changed everything. Insurance fraud was a federal crime. But more than that, it meant he'd been lying to me for over a year, playing a role even more elaborate than I'd imagined. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house and tried to process what I'd learned. The divorce papers, the girlfriend, and now insurance fraud. How had I missed all of this? How had the man I'd lived with for decades become such a stranger? I called my sister Rebecca in Portland, needing to hear a familiar voice. "Diana, how was the retirement party? I'm so sorry I couldn't make it, but you know how things are with Mom's treatments." The retirement party felt like it had happened in another lifetime. "It was interesting," I said, then found myself spilling everything. The divorce papers, Vanessa, the insurance investigator. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her silence somehow more comforting than any words could have been. "That bastard," she finally said. "Diana, you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. You need someone who can fight dirty, because it sounds like Marcus has been planning this for a long time." She was right. This wasn't a simple divorce between two people who'd grown apart. This was something calculated and cruel. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. The next day, I met David Chen at a coffee shop near downtown Atlanta. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a manila folder thick with documents. He slid a photo across the table toward me. It was Marcus, lifting weights at a gym. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 weeks ago. "Your husband claimed he couldn't lift more than 10 pounds without severe pain," Chen said. "This was taken at Elite Fitness on Peachtree. He's been going there regularly for months." More photos followed. Marcus playing tennis. Marcus helping someone move furniture. Marcus very clearly not suffering from the debilitating back injury he'd claimed. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. "So far, about $43,000 in fraudulent payments. But it's not just the money, Mrs. Monroe. If we can prove deliberate fraud, there could be criminal charges." $43,000. The number stuck in my mind as I drove home. That was money stolen from an insurance company, but it was also money that had come into our household under false pretenses. Money that would be split 50-50 in the divorce settlement. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the house I might have to sell. The rose bushes Marcus had planted for our 10th anniversary were blooming, their red petals bright against the white picket fence. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like the home of a couple who'd built a life together. But appearances could be deceiving. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I called the number on Richardson Associates letterhead, the law firm Marcus had retained. "I'd like to speak with someone about the Monroe divorce case," I told the receptionist. "Are you represented by counsel?" "Not yet. I'm the defendant, Diana Monroe." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Monroe, but we can't discuss the case with you directly. You'll need to retain your own attorney." "I understand, but I have some information that might be relevant to the case. Information about insurance fraud." Another pause, longer this time. "Hold, please." A man's voice came on the line, smooth and confident. "Mrs. Monroe, this is Robert Richardson. I understand you have some concerns about your divorce proceedings." "I understand my husband is your client." I can't discuss the details of our representation, but I can listen if you have something you'd like to share. I took a deep breath. How much do you know about your client's disability claim? The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Mrs. Monroe, I think you should retain counsel immediately. This conversation is over. The line went dead. I smiled for the first time in days. Richardson hadn't known about the insurance fraud, which meant Marcus hadn't told his lawyer about his illegal income, which meant his financial disclosures to the court were incomplete at best, fraudulent at worst. I spent the next 3 days researching divorce attorneys in Atlanta, looking for someone with experience in complex financial cases. The name that kept coming up was Catherine Walsh, a former prosecutor who'd built a reputation for taking on difficult cases and winning. Her office was in Buckhead, all glass and steel, the kind of place that charged premium fees. But after 35 years of earning a good salary, I could afford the best. Catherine Walsh was intimidating in person, tall and sharp-eyed, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in precise handwriting. "Mrs. Monroe," she said when I finished, "your husband has made several significant mistakes. The insurance fraud is the obvious one, but filing for divorce while concealing assets and income is equally serious. How much do you know about your joint finances?" "Everything. I handled all our investments and planning." "Good. I'm going to need complete documentation of every asset, every account, every investment. If he's been hiding money through the disability payments, there might be other irregularities." She was right. Over the next week, I went through our financial records with a fine-tooth comb, comparing bank statements, investment accounts, and credit card bills. What I found made my blood run cold. For the past 2 years, Marcus had been slowly siphoning money from our joint accounts into a separate checking account I'd never seen. Small amounts, never enough to trigger my attention, but they added up to nearly $60,000. Money that should have been disclosed in the divorce proceedings. But that wasn't the worst discovery. As I dug deeper into our credit card statements, I found charges I didn't recognize. Hotels in Charleston, restaurants I'd never been to, jewelry purchases from stores I'd never visited. He'd been financing his relationship with Vanessa using our joint credit cards, spending our money on romantic getaways and expensive gifts for his girlfriend. The betrayal was staggering. Not only had he been unfaithful, not only had he been committing insurance fraud, but he'd been stealing from me to pay for it all. The man I'd trusted with everything had been systematically looting our marriage. I made copies of everything and delivered them to Catherine's office. She spread the documents across her conference table, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. "Diana, we're not just talking about divorce anymore. We're talking about financial crimes. I'm going to recommend that we not only fight the divorce, but pursue criminal charges against your husband." "Can we do that?" "We can report the crimes to the appropriate authorities and let them decide whether to prosecute. But in terms of the divorce, this changes everything. When one spouse conceals assets and income, the court can award the innocent spouse more than 50% of the marital estate, sometimes significantly more." For the first time since Marcus had handed me those divorce papers, I felt like I had some control over the situation. But I wanted more than just a favorable settlement. I wanted justice. "What about the insurance fraud? Can we use that?" Catherine smiled, and it reminded me of a predator spotting prey. "Oh, we're going to use everything. Your husband thought he was clever, but he left a paper trail that a first-year law student could follow. By the time we're done, he's going to wish he'd never heard of Richardson Associates." We spent the next hour planning our strategy. Catherine would file a response to the divorce petition, including a counterclaim for fraud and a request for emergency financial relief. We would also file a motion requiring Marcus to disclose all assets and sources of income, including the disability payments. "He's going to fight this," Catherine warned. "When people realize they're cornered, they can become dangerous. Are you prepared for this to get ugly?" I thought about the retirement party, about the cold smile on Marcus's face as he'd handed me the divorce papers in front of all my colleagues, about Vanessa, barely older than the daughters I'd never had because Marcus said he wasn't ready for children, about the years of lies and theft and betrayal. Let it get ugly, I said. I'm not backing down. Over the next few days, I began to understand just how deep Marcus's deception went. Catherine's investigator found bank statements showing regular deposits from the insurance company, money that had never appeared in our joint accounts. He'd been living a double life, collecting fraudulent disability payments while spending our legitimate money on his girlfriend. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor of 15 years, called me one afternoon while I was reviewing financial documents at the kitchen table. "Diana, honey, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Mrs. Patterson was 83, a retired school teacher who missed nothing that happened on our street. If there was gossip to be known, she knew it. "Of course, Mrs. Patterson, what's on your mind?" "Well, it's about Marcus. I've been seeing him with that young woman, and I couldn't help but wonder if you knew about it." My heart stopped. "What young woman?" "The little blonde thing. She's been coming to the house when you're at work. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but they seem awfully friendly, if you know what I mean." Vanessa had been in my house, in my home. The violation felt almost physical. "How long has this been going on, Mrs. Patterson?" "Oh, honey, at least a year, maybe longer. I kept thinking you must know, but you never said anything, and I didn't want to pry." A year. Marcus had been bringing his girlfriend into our home for at least a year, probably longer. They'd been laughing at me, planning their future in the house I'd helped pay for, using the bed I'd shared with him. "Mrs. Patterson, would you be willing to tell this to my lawyer?" "Of course, dear. I've got plenty more to tell her, too. Like the time I saw him loading boxes into that girl's car, big boxes, like he was moving things out of your house." The phone call lasted another 20 minutes, and by the end, I had a timeline of Marcus's betrayal that stretched back nearly 2 years. Mrs. Patterson had documentation, too, photos she'd taken because she was worried about break-ins in the neighborhood, not realizing she was creating evidence of her neighbor's adultery. I called Catherine immediately. "This keeps getting better," she said after I relayed the conversation. "Adultery, fraud, theft, and now he's been removing marital property without your consent. Diana, when this is over, you're going to own everything, and he's going to owe you money." That night, alone in the house that no longer felt like home, I made a list of everything I knew about Marcus's crimes. The insurance fraud, the hidden bank accounts, the stolen money, the adultery, the property theft. Each item was a nail in the coffin of our marriage, but also evidence that would destroy him in court. I thought about the retirement party, about how proud I'd been of everything I'd accomplished in my career. 35 years of building bridges, of creating things that would last long after I was gone. Marcus had tried to tear down everything I'd built, but he'd underestimated the woman he'd married. Engineers don't just build things, we solve problems. And Marcus had just become the most complex problem I'd ever tackled. The solution was already taking shape in my mind, piece by piece, like a blueprint for his destruction. He'd started this war when he handed me those divorce papers at my retirement party. He'd chosen the battlefield when he decided to steal from me and lie to me and cheat on me. But I was going to finish it. And when I was done, he'd understand that 35 years of marriage to an engineer meant I knew exactly how to bring down everything he'd tried to build on lies. The foundation was cracked, the structure was unsound, and the whole thing was about to come crashing down. Marcus just didn't know it yet. The morning Catherine filed our response to the divorce petition, I woke up to 17 missed calls on my phone, all from Marcus. The voicemail started calm, then grew increasingly frantic as the night wore on. "Diana, we need to talk. Call me back." "What the hell are you doing? Richardson says you're making accusations about insurance fraud. You're making a mistake. You don't understand the whole situation. God damn it, Diana, pick up the phone." The last message was barely coherent, slurred words about how I was ruining everything and how he'd make me pay for being vindictive. I saved every recording and forwarded them to Catherine. Evidence of intimidation would only strengthen our case. My phone rang again as I was making coffee. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. I had nothing to say to him that wouldn't be better said through lawyers. Catherine called an hour later, her voice crackling with energy. "Diana, we just hit the jackpot. Richardson's office called this morning trying to negotiate. They want to settle out of court, no discovery, sealed records. They're scared." "What did you tell them?" "I told them to go to hell. If Marcus wanted to settle quietly, he should have thought of that before he committed multiple felonies. We're going to discovery, we're going to depositions, and we're going to make him explain every dollar he stole." Discovery, the legal process where both sides had to turn over all relevant documents and information. Marcus would have to disclose every bank account, every credit card statement, every source of income. The disability payments he'd been hiding, the money he'd siphoned into secret accounts, the purchases he'd made for Vanessa. Everything would come to light. How long will that take? Months, but it's going to be worth it. By the time we're done, he's going to owe you so much money that he'll be paying alimony until he's 90. I spent the rest of the morning organizing documents, creating a timeline of every suspicious transaction and unexplained expense I'd found. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Marcus had been planning this divorce for at least 2 years, slowly moving money out of our joint accounts and into places I couldn't access. But he'd made crucial mistakes. The disability fraud had created a paper trail with the insurance company. The credit card purchases for Vanessa had left digital footprints. The secret bank account had his social security number attached to it. For someone who thought he was being clever, he'd left evidence everywhere. My doorbell rang just after lunch. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman with blonde hair and nervous eyes, clutching a small purse like a lifeline. Vanessa. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm Vanessa Collins. I think we should talk." She was prettier than I'd expected, with the kind of flawless skin and bright eyes that only come with youth. But there were lines of stress around her mouth, and her hands were shaking. "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Miss Collins. Please, I know you must hate me, but there are things you don't know about Marcus, about what he's been telling me." Despite every instinct screaming at me to slam the door in her face, curiosity won. I unlatched the chain and stepped aside to let her in. She perched on the edge of my couch like she might need to run at any moment. Up close, she looked even younger, maybe 26 instead of 28. I wondered if Marcus had lied about her age, too. "What do you want, Vanessa?" "I wanted to apologize and to tell you the truth about some things." She twisted her purse strap between her fingers. "Marcus told me you guys were separated. He said you'd been living apart for over a year, that the divorce was just a formality." The lie was so audacious it took my breath away. "We were living in the same house until last week. I know that now. When I saw the date on the divorce papers, I realized he'd been lying to me, too." Tears started forming in her eyes. "I'm not a homewrecker, Mrs. Monroe. I would never have gotten involved with a married man. When I found out he was still living with you, I broke it off." "When was this?" 3 days ago, right after your retirement party. He came to my apartment furious, saying you were trying to destroy him with lies about insurance fraud. That's when I started putting the pieces together. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but she seemed genuinely distressed, and her story aligned with what I knew about Marcus's recent behavior. "What pieces?" "The back injury, for one thing. He told me he was on disability, but I've seen him at the gym dozens of times. Heavy lifting, tennis, everything. I asked him about it once, and he said the doctors cleared him for light exercise." She laughed bitterly. "Light exercise? He benches 200 pounds. Did you know about the money he was spending on you?" Her face reddened. "Some of it. The hotels, the dinners. But he said it was from his disability payments and his savings. I didn't know he was using joint credit cards. I didn't know he was stealing from you." We talked for another hour, and by the end, I had a clearer picture of Marcus's manipulation. He'd told Vanessa that I was a cold, career-obsessed woman who'd emotionally abandoned him years ago. He'd positioned himself as the victim of a loveless marriage, deserving of sympathy and affection. But Vanessa had seen through the lies when she learned about the insurance fraud. "Mrs. Monroe, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. And if there's anything I can do to help you prove what he's been doing, I'll do it." Why would you help me? Because he used me. He made me complicit in crimes I didn't know about, and because what he did to you isn't right. She stood to leave, then turned back. There's something else you should know. Marcus has been talking about moving to Costa Rica. He says he's got money stashed away and he's going to disappear before the divorce gets messy. After she left, I called Catherine immediately. He's planning to flee the country. We need to freeze his assets before he can access them. I'll file an emergency motion tomorrow morning. If he's got hidden assets overseas, we can get a court order preventing him from leaving the jurisdiction. But Catherine's next words chilled me. Diana, if he's planning to run, he might try to clean out whatever accounts he can access first. You should check your joint accounts immediately. I logged into our online banking while I was still on the phone with her. Our main checking account, which had contained $12,000 yesterday, now showed a balance of $300. Our savings account was completely empty. He's already started, I said, my voice hollow. He cleaned out everything he could access. That son of a bitch. I'll have the motion filed within the hour. And Diana, start documenting everything. Every phone call, every attempt at contact. If he's desperate enough to steal your money and plan to flee the country, there's no telling what else he might do. I spent the evening changing locks and installing a security system. If Marcus was becoming dangerous, I wasn't going to be caught unprepared. But as I armed the system for the night, I realized I wasn't afraid. I was angry. He'd stolen from me, lied to me, cheated on me, and now he was trying to escape justice by running to another country. But he'd underestimated me at every turn. I'd spent 35 years solving complex engineering problems, and Marcus had just become the most challenging project of my career. The next morning brought another revelation. David Chen, the insurance investigator, called with news that made my blood boil. Mrs. Monroe, we've been digging deeper into your husband's case, and we found something interesting. The back injury he claimed happened at work, there's no record of it with his employer's insurance company. What does that mean? It means he filed a false claim with our company for an injury that either didn't happen or wasn't work-related. But here's the kicker. We found medical records showing he was treated for a minor strain 2 years ago, and the doctor cleared him for full activity within 6 weeks. He's been collecting disability payments for an injury that healed 18 months ago. The fraud was even more extensive than I'd realized. Marcus hadn't just exaggerated an existing injury. He'd fabricated an ongoing disability for over a year. What's the penalty for that kind of fraud? Federal crime. Could be looking at 5 to 10 years, depending on the total amount involved. And Mrs. Monroe, we're going to need you to testify when this goes to trial. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the financial documents spread across the table. Bank statements, credit card bills, insurance papers, mortgage documents. The debris of a 35-year marriage reduced to evidence in a fraud case. My phone rang. Marcus again. This time, I answered. What do you want? Diana, you need to stop this madness. You're destroying both of us over nothing. Nothing? You stole from me, Marcus. You committed insurance fraud. You cleaned out our accounts. I took what was mine. Half of everything belongs to me anyway. Not the disability payments, not the money you've been hiding, and definitely not the joint accounts you emptied without my consent. His voice turned cold. You're making a big mistake. I've got lawyers too, and they're telling me I can make this very expensive for you. Let them try. I've got evidence of every crime you've committed, every dollar you've stolen, every lie you've told. Your lawyers can't fix the fact that you're a felon. You vindictive bitch. You're going to regret this. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, then called Catherine. He just threatened me again. I recorded the call this time. Good. We're building a harassment case along with everything else. Diana, I've got news. The judge granted our emergency motion. All of Marcus's assets are frozen and there's a hold on his passport. He's not going anywhere. What happens next? Now we go hunting. Full discovery, depositions, forensic accounting. We're going to trace every dollar he's hidden and every lie he's told. By the time we're done, he's going to wish he'd never heard your name. The discovery process was like archaeological excavation, carefully uncovering layers of deception that went back years. Catherine's forensic accountant found evidence of hidden assets, forged documents, and financial manipulation that painted Marcus as a criminal mastermind or a complete fool. Given his recent behavior, I was leaning toward fool. 3 weeks after the emergency motion, we had our first major breakthrough. Marcus's secret bank account, the one he'd been using to hide the disability payments, contained far more money than the insurance fraud could account for. Over $200,000 had passed through the account in the past 18 months. Where did the rest come from? I asked Catherine as we reviewed the bank statements in her conference room. That's what we're going to find out. But Diana, this suggests he's been planning this for much longer than we thought. You don't accumulate this kind of hidden money overnight. The answer came from an unexpected source. Rebecca, my sister in Portland, called me with information that made the whole picture suddenly clear. Diana, you remember that consulting work Marcus was doing a few years ago? The private engineering firm that hired him for those weekend projects. I did remember. Marcus had been excited about making extra money, consulting on small residential projects while I was busy with major infrastructure work. But he'd stopped mentioning it after a few months, and I'd assumed the work had dried up. What about it? I ran into Tom Bradley at the grocery store yesterday. You remember Tom? He used to work with Dad at the Port Authority.
Well, he mentioned that his son hired Marcus to design his house addition, and he was surprised when Marcus demanded to be paid in cash. Cash payments, no paper trail, no tax reporting, no way for me to know about the income. I asked Rebecca to get more details, and what she learned filled in the missing pieces of Marcus's scheme. For 3 years, he'd been taking consulting jobs and demanding cash payment. Small residential projects, deck additions, garage conversions, the kind of work that homeowners often preferred to pay for under the table. He'd been reporting none of the income to the IRS and hiding all of it in the secret bank account. Tax evasion on top of everything else, Catherine said when I brought her the information. This just keeps getting better. The IRS is going to want their money, plus penalties and interest. He could end up owing more in back taxes than your entire divorce settlement is worth. But Marcus wasn't going quietly. As the walls closed in around him, he became increasingly erratic and vindictive. He started calling my former colleagues, telling them lies about my mental health and suggesting I was having a breakdown. He contacted my clients, trying to damage my reputation in the engineering community. The harassment escalated when he hired a private investigator to follow me. For a week, everywhere I went, a nondescript sedan appeared in my rearview mirror. The investigator was clumsy and obvious, probably the cheapest Marcus could find, but the message was clear. He was trying to intimidate me. Catherine put a stop to it with a single phone call to Richardson's office. I told them that if their client continued to harass you, we'd add stalking charges to our civil suit. The private investigator disappeared immediately. But Marcus's desperation led to his biggest mistake yet. Unable to access his frozen assets and facing mounting legal bills, he tried to sell our house without my consent. He forged my signature on a listing agreement and put the property on the market at below market value for a quick sale. I found out when Mrs. Patterson called to ask why there was a for sale sign in my front yard. "That stupid son of a bitch," Catherine said when I called her. "Forging your signature on legal documents is a felony, and trying to sell marital property without consent is contempt of court." Within hours, we had the listing pulled and the real estate agent informed about the forgery. Marcus had handed us another criminal charge on a silver platter. The depositions began in earnest after that. I sat in a sterile conference room and watched Marcus squirm under oath as Catherine methodically destroyed every lie he'd told. The insurance fraud, the hidden assets, the tax evasion, the forged documents, everything came out in excruciating detail. "Mr. Monroe, you testified that you've been unable to work due to a back injury, is that correct?" "Yes. And yet we have photographs of you lifting weights, playing tennis, and helping people move furniture. How do you explain that?" "The doctors said light exercise was okay." "Lifting 200 pounds is light exercise?" I was having a good day. You were having good days for 18 months straight? Marcus's lawyer, a different attorney from Richardson's firm, kept objecting, but the evidence was overwhelming. Video surveillance, bank records, medical documents, tax returns that didn't match his actual income, everything painted a picture of deliberate and ongoing fraud. The most damaging testimony came from Vanessa Collins. Catherine had subpoenaed her, and she appeared reluctantly, but told the truth about everything Marcus had told her regarding his marriage, his finances, and his plans. He said he was going to take half of Mrs. Monroe's retirement savings and move to Costa Rica, she testified. He had maps and real estate listings. He was planning to buy a house near the beach and live off the money from the divorce settlement. Did he ever mention the disability payments? He said they were temporary, just until the divorce was final. He laughed about how easy it was to fool the insurance company. Marcus's face grew redder with each revelation. When his lawyer tried to cross-examine Vanessa, she held firm to her story and produced text messages Marcus had sent her detailing his plans to defraud me and flee the country. "Your Honor," Catherine said during a break in the proceedings, "we've now established that Mr. Monroe committed insurance fraud, tax evasion, forgery, contempt of court, and conspiracy to hide marital assets. We're no longer talking about a simple divorce. We're talking about a criminal enterprise designed to steal from my client." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd probably seen every form of matrimonial misconduct, was not impressed with Marcus's explanations. "Mr. Monroe, these are serious allegations. I'm ordering a complete forensic audit of all marital assets, and I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. In the meantime, you are forbidden from accessing any joint accounts, selling any marital property, or contacting Mrs. Monroe except through counsel." Marcus's lawyer huddled with him in the hallway during the next break. I could see them through the glass doors, Marcus gesturing wildly while his attorney shook his head. They were in full damage control mode, but the damage was already done. "Diana," Catherine said, joining me at the conference table, "they're going to come to us with a settlement offer. Probably something generous, trying to avoid criminal charges. How do you want to handle it?" I thought about the retirement party, about the cold smile on Marcus's face as he'd handed me divorce papers in front of all my colleagues, about the years of lies and theft and betrayal, about Vanessa Collins, manipulated and deceived just like I had been. "No settlement," I said. "I want him to face justice for everything he's done. Criminal charges, civil penalties, the works. He made his choice when he decided to steal from me and lie to me. Now he gets to live with the consequences." Catherine smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The criminal charges were filed 2 weeks later. Insurance fraud, tax evasion, forgery, contempt of court, and theft of marital assets. Marcus was arrested at his brother's house, where he'd been staying since our separation. The local news covered the story, describing him as an engineer who'd stolen from his wife and defrauded an insurance company. I watched the coverage from my living room, sitting in the chair where Marcus used to read his evening newspaper. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if removing his presence had purified the air. My phone rang constantly as the story spread through the engineering community. Former colleagues calling to express support, clients reassuring me that they still trusted my professional reputation, friends offering help and encouragement. The harassment campaign Marcus had tried to launch against me had backfired spectacularly. But the best call came from David Chen, the insurance investigator. "Mrs. Monroe, I wanted to personally thank you for your cooperation in this case. Your husband just agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution of the fraudulent payments plus penalties, and lifetime ban from government insurance programs." 5 years. It seemed like a long time and not nearly long enough. But it was justice, and it meant Marcus would spend his immediate future in prison instead of on a beach in Costa Rica. The divorce trial was almost anticlimactic after the criminal proceedings. With Marcus in custody awaiting sentencing, his new public defender was focused on damage control rather than fighting for marital assets. Catherine presented our evidence methodically, showing how Marcus had systematically looted our marriage for his own benefit. The forensic accountant had traced every hidden dollar, every fraudulent transaction, every attempt to conceal assets. The total amount Marcus had stolen from me, including the insurance fraud, the hidden consulting income, and the money he'd siphoned from our joint accounts, exceeded $400,000. Your Honor, Catherine argued, Mr. Monroe didn't just breach his marital obligations. He conducted a criminal enterprise designed to steal from his wife while planning to abandon her with nothing. This wasn't a marriage that grew apart over time. This was a calculated theft disguised as a divorce. The judge awarded me everything. The house, the retirement savings, the investment accounts, everything Marcus had tried to steal. She also ordered him to pay restitution for the money he'd hidden and the fraudulent insurance payments. When the accounting was complete, Marcus would owe me over $600,000. In 30 years on the bench, the judge said, I've never seen such a deliberate and calculated betrayal of the marital relationship. Mr. Monroe, you will be responsible for the full costs of this litigation, including Mrs. Monroe's attorney fees. And you will remain liable for all restitution payments even while incarcerated.
Marcus sat silently through the proceedings, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive suits he used to wear to court. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before final judgment, he just shook his head. Walking out of the courthouse, Catherine handed me a thick folder containing copies of all the court orders and judgments. "Congratulations, Diana, you won everything." I looked back at the courthouse steps where Marcus was being led away in shackles. "No," I said, "justice won everything. I just helped it along." The local news covered the final judgment, describing it as one of the largest divorce awards in Georgia history. But for me, the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was knowing that Marcus would spend the next 5 years thinking about what he'd lost when he decided to betray the woman who'd loved him for 35 years. I drove home to the house that was now entirely mine, pulling into the driveway that no longer held any memories of the man who'd tried to steal my future. Mrs. Patterson was working in her garden, and she waved as I got out of the car. "How did it go, dear?" "Justice was served, Mrs. Patterson. Justice was served." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and a legal pad, making a list of everything I wanted to do with my newfound freedom. Travel, maybe back to school for a master's degree, volunteer work with the Engineering Society, possibly even dating again someday. The future stretched ahead of me, bright with possibilities that Marcus had tried to steal but failed to destroy. He'd thought he was clever, thought he could manipulate and deceive his way to easy money and a young girlfriend. Instead, he'd lost everything and gained a prison sentence. I raised my wine glass in a toast to the empty house. "To justice," I said aloud, "and to the 43 phone calls that proved him wrong." 6 months after Marcus was sentenced, I stood in the arrival terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport holding a sign with Elena Vasquez written in block letters. My new life had begun with an unexpected phone call from the Atlanta School District asking if I'd consider mentoring their engineering students through a volunteer program. One thing had led to another, and now I was hosting Elena, a brilliant 17-year-old from Guatemala whose family had immigrated to Atlanta when she was 12. Elena emerged from the gate looking nervous but determined, clutching a worn backpack that contained everything she owned. Her acceptance letter to Georgia Tech's engineering program was folded carefully in her jacket pocket, but the scholarship only covered tuition. Housing, books, and living expenses were her responsibility, and her family couldn't help. That's where the Alice Monroe Foundation came in. I'd established the foundation with part of the divorce settlement, naming it after my mother, who died when I was Elena's age. The foundation provided housing and mentorship for first-generation college students pursuing engineering degrees. Elena was our first recipient, and as I watched her eyes widen at the sight of the bustling airport, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any professional achievement. "Mrs. Monroe," she asked tentatively, her English accented but clear. "Call me Diana, and welcome to Atlanta, Elena." The drive to her new apartment gave us time to talk.
Elena had been fascinated by bridges since childhood, inspired by the suspension bridge that connected her hometown to the rest of Guatemala. Her dream was to design infrastructure that could withstand natural disasters and serve communities for generations. "My father thinks engineering is not for girls," she confided as we pulled into the apartment complex. "But my mother, she saves every peso to help me come here." I thought about my own journey, the obstacles I'd faced as a woman in engineering, the way Marcus had dismissed my career as an obsession rather than a calling. Elena would face similar challenges, but she'd have support I never had. The apartment was small but comfortable, furnished with donations from my former colleagues who'd heard about the foundation. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she walked through the space. "This is really mine? For 4 years?" "As long as you maintain your grades and stay in the program, yes, and I'll be here to help whenever you need it." Over the following weeks, I threw myself into mentoring Elena and expanding the foundation. The legal settlement had given me financial freedom, but more importantly, it had given me purpose. Every morning, I woke up knowing that my day would matter to someone else's future. The foundation grew quickly. Word spread through the engineering community about what we were doing, and donations poured in from colleagues who wanted to support the next generation. Within 6 months, we were housing 12 students and had a waiting list of 50 more. My sister Rebecca visited from Portland that fall, marveling at how different I seemed. "You look 10 years younger," she said, as we walked through the foundation's new offices, "and happier than I've seen you since before you married Marcus." She was right. The stress lines that had carved themselves around my eyes during the final years of my marriage had softened. I'd started taking yoga classes, joined a book club, even bought myself a convertible with some of the settlement money. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself instead of trying to hold together a relationship with someone who was systematically betraying me. "I keep expecting to be angrier," I admitted as we sat in my garden that evening. 35 years of marriage, and I barely think about him anymore." "That's because you got justice," Rebecca said. "Real justice, not just revenge. You didn't just punish him for what he did to you, you turned it into something positive for other people." The foundation's success had attracted media attention, and several magazines had run features about my story. The coverage was always respectful, focusing on the educational mission rather than the sensational aspects of the divorce. But it had one unexpected consequence. I started receiving letters from other women who'd discovered similar betrayals in their own marriages. The stories were heartbreakingly familiar: hidden assets, secret affairs, financial manipulation, husbands who'd spent years planning to abandon wives who'd sacrificed their own ambitions for the marriage. One letter particularly moved me. Sarah Chen, a woman in her 50s from Sacramento, had discovered her husband's affair and financial fraud just as I had. But unlike me, she didn't have the resources to fight back effectively. Her husband had hidden their assets so thoroughly that she was facing poverty in her retirement years. I called her immediately. "Mrs. Chen, this is Diana Monroe. I received your letter about your situation." "Oh my God, Mrs. Monroe, I can't believe you called me personally. I read about your foundation in that magazine article, and I just wanted to tell you how inspiring your story is." We talked for 2 hours. Sarah's story was painfully similar to mine, but her husband had been more sophisticated in his deception. He'd moved money offshore, created shell companies, even obtained a second passport without her knowledge. By the time she discovered the betrayal, he'd disappeared entirely, leaving her with debts she didn't know existed and assets she couldn't locate. "The lawyers all want retainers I can't afford," she said, her voice breaking. "And even if I could pay them, they say the money is probably gone forever." That conversation led to the expansion of our mission. The Alice Munro Foundation began offering legal assistance to women facing similar situations, connecting them with attorneys who specialized in complex financial fraud cases. We couldn't save every marriage, but we could ensure that women like Sarah had the resources to fight for what was rightfully theirs. Sarah's case became our first major legal victory outside of my own situation. Our forensic accountant tracked her husband's hidden assets to banks in 3 different countries, and our international legal team was able to freeze the accounts before he could move the money again. It took 18 months, but Sarah eventually recovered most of what he'd stolen. The day Sarah called to tell me she'd received the settlement check, I was sitting in my home office reviewing applications for new foundation scholarships. Her voice was thick with tears, but they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than despair. "Diana, I don't know how to thank you. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. Now I can actually retire with dignity." "You don't need to thank me, Sarah. You fought for yourself. We just helped level the playing field." After we hung up, I walked out to my garden and sat among the roses Marcus had planted years ago. They were blooming more vibrantly than ever, as if freed from the toxic energy that had pervaded the house during our marriage. I'd considered removing them after the divorce, wanting to erase every trace of him, but decided they were part of the landscape, now transformed by new care and attention. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. She'd just received her grades for her first semester at Georgia Tech. Dean's List with a 3.9 GPA. The message included a photo of her standing in front of the campus engineering building, beaming with pride and holding up her grade report. This was what justice looked like, I realized.
Not just punishment for those who'd done wrong, but opportunity for those who deserved better. That winter, I received an unexpected visitor. David Chen, the insurance investigator who'd first uncovered Marcus's fraud, knocked on my door on a snowy January evening. "Mrs. Monroe, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to give you an update on your ex-husband's case." I invited him in, curious about what had brought him to my door. David looked tired, older than when I'd first met him 2 years earlier. "How is the prison treating him?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know. "That's actually what I came to talk to you about. Marcus was released last week." I felt my stomach drop. Released? But he was sentenced to 5 years. Good behavior, overcrowding, some legal maneuvering by a new attorney. He served 3 years and 2 months. The news shouldn't have affected me as strongly as it did. I'd built a new life, found peace and purpose, surrounded myself with people who valued and respected me. Marcus was a chapter in my past, not a threat to my future. But the idea of him walking free while I was still paying for his crimes felt fundamentally wrong. Is he still obligated to pay the restitution? That's the thing, Mrs. Monroe. He's filed for bankruptcy, claims he has no assets and no ability to pay. The federal restitution order is still in effect, but practically speaking, you're unlikely to see any of that money. I walked David to the door, my mind spinning with this new information. Marcus was free, probably living with relatives or friends, starting over with a clean slate, while I continued to deal with the aftermath of his crimes. But as I closed the door behind David and looked around my transformed home, I realized something important. Marcus's freedom didn't diminish my victory. The foundation was thriving, changing lives, creating opportunities for young people like Elena who deserved a chance to build something meaningful. The legal assistance program had helped dozens of women fight back against financial abuse and fraud. I'd turned his betrayal into something powerful and positive. His bankruptcy didn't erase that accomplishment. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that our story wasn't quite finished. The answer came 3 months later in the phone call from an unknown number. "Diana, it's Marcus. Don't hang up." I almost did anyway, but curiosity held me on the line. "What do you want?" "I want to apologize and to ask for your help." The audacity of the request took my breath away. "My help? After everything you've done?" "I know I have no right to ask, but Diana, I'm homeless. I can't get work because of the felony conviction. I'm living in my car, and I don't know what else to do." Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, to refuse to engage with the man who'd tried to destroy my life. But another part was curious about what had brought him to this point of desperation. "Why are you calling me, Marcus? What makes you think I'd help you after what you put me through?" "Because you're a better person than I am. You always were. And because I know you believe in second chances,
even for people who don't deserve them. I was quiet for a long moment, processing the conversation. This was the man who'd served me divorce papers at my retirement party, who'd stolen from me for years, who'd tried to flee the country with our money. Now he was asking for compassion from the woman he'd betrayed? "Where are you staying?" "There's a shelter downtown, but they only let you stay for 3 nights at a time. Most nights I sleep in the car." "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Anything, construction, manual labor, whatever. But the background checks keep coming back with the fraud conviction, and nobody wants to hire me." I thought about Elena, about Sarah Chen, about all the women whose lives had been damaged by men who'd prioritized their own selfish desires over their family's well-being. I thought about the foundation, built on the principle that everyone deserved a chance to rebuild and start over. "Marcus, I'm not going to give you money or let you stay in my house, but there's a program downtown that helps ex-offenders find employment. It's run by a church group, and they don't discriminate based on criminal history." I gave him the contact information, then added, "If you're serious about making amends, prove it through your actions, not your words. Get a job, pay your own way, and maybe someday we can have a conversation about forgiveness." "Diana, I'm not finished. You destroyed 35 years of trust with your lies and theft. If you want any chance of redemption, you're going to have to earn it over years, not minutes." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. The conversation had stirred up emotions I thought I'd resolved, but also clarified something important about my own values. I believed in justice, but I also believed in the possibility of redemption for people willing to do the hard work of change. Whether Marcus was truly capable of that kind of change remained to be seen. Over the following months, I heard occasional updates about his progress. He found work with a construction company that specialized in hiring ex-offenders. He was living in a halfway house, attending counseling sessions, slowly rebuilding a life that bore no resemblance to the one he'd tried to steal from me. I felt no satisfaction in his struggles, but also no sympathy for the consequences of his choices. He was learning what it meant to start over with nothing, something he'd tried to force on me through his fraud and betrayal. Meanwhile, my own life continued to flourish. The foundation had expanded to serve students in 3 states, and we'd helped over 200 women navigate the legal complexities of financial fraud in their marriages. Elena had completed her sophomore year with honors and was already working on research projects with her professors. On the 2nd anniversary of the divorce settlement, I hosted a celebration at the foundation offices. Elena was there, along with 12 other scholarship recipients, Sarah Chen, who'd flown in from California, and dozens of supporters who'd helped build what we'd created. As I looked around the room filled with young faces bright with possibility and older faces marked by hard-won wisdom, I realized that Marcus's betrayal had led to something he never could have imagined. His attempt to destroy my life had instead transformed it into something richer and more meaningful than it had ever been. Rebecca raised her glass for a toast. To Diana, who turned betrayal into opportunity, pain into purpose, and justice into hope for everyone in this room. The applause was warm and genuine, but as it died down, I found myself thinking not about what I'd lost, but about what I'd gained. The foundation would outlast any individual story of betrayal or redemption. The students we'd helped would go on to build bridges and design buildings that would serve communities for generations. That night, as I sat in my garden among the roses that had survived both Marcus's presence and his absence, I finally understood what complete victory looked like. It wasn't about destroying the person who'd wronged you. It was about building something so strong and meaningful from the wreckage that their betrayal became irrelevant to your happiness. Marcus had given me divorce papers at my retirement party, thinking he was ending my story. Instead, he'd freed me to write a completely new chapter, one where I was the architect of my own future, rather than the victim of someone else's selfishness. The foundation's work would continue long after I was gone, helping young people build careers and older people rebuild their lives after betrayal. That legacy was worth more than any individual revenge could ever be. As I turned off the garden lights and headed inside, my phone showed 43 missed calls from various foundation supporters, scholarship applicants, and women seeking legal assistance. Each call represented someone whose life could be changed for the better, someone who deserved a second chance or a first opportunity. Tomorrow, I'd return those calls and continue the work of transforming pain into purpose. Tonight, I was simply grateful for the jury that had brought me to this place of peace and fulfillment. Marcus had tried to steal my future, but instead, he'd given me a calling that was larger than any individual happiness could have been. For that unintended gift, I was almost grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.